Great, thank you. So, welcome everybody. This is the 7th Policy Influencers Network group event. And the theme of this one is about the right to grow and tools for managing the shared care of public land for food growing. And the Policy Influencer Network groups are a kind of forum that we at the Urban Agriculture Consortium have created to provide a bit of a sort of open mind, open heart kind of space for people who are involved in implementing or designing and developing policy around the food system and in all its different facets. And so it's a place of inquiry, really, and of exchange, to hear what amazing people are developing on the ground and think about how they connect with places, with local authorities, in order to sort of push forward the way that food is kind of becomes a more collaborative, sort of equitable field within urban and peri-urban spaces. So we're really excited to welcome our speakers today, who are going to talk about these subjects and share the tools that they're developing. And in the pings, it's really about moving the conversation from thinking about problems and problem solving to thinking about possibilities and collaborations. So we've got 2 hours together, and we'll hear from all the speakers first of all, and then we will put it out to you others who are here to explore what this means, what this might mean in your context, wherever you are. There's some people here from different cities and so on. I think probably because of the glitch this morning, we had 42 people signing up. So there's obviously not that number in the space. So hopefully people will kind of come in as and when, but yeah, sorry about that. But whoever's in the space is who's supposed to be in the space. Let's frame it like that. So I wanted to I'll start off with a little bit of background about where this ping came from. And so I became aware that the campaign around the right to grow, the right to cultivate on public land, was out there, being put forward by Incredible Edible. And at the same time, we've been sort of convening a group of people who are working on different kinds of mapping of food land and developing some really kind of quite game-changing tools for unlocking access to land in ways that make sense to communities, that can be empowering. And so it felt like a really natural kind of coming together of ideas, really, and in the context of the right to grow. And Prue will talk about this in a moment. A local authority or regional authority, or whoever can kind of support this idea of that communities have the right to grow on public land in order to meet their own needs and have greater sovereignty around their own food and their own nutrition and to have more kind of power in communities to be able to do that, given that all of the multiple problems we know about facing our food system, and that we're the sort of reckoning that we're quite unprepared for what might come around the corner in terms of food supply, and also real concerns around the kind of the quality of cheap food. So so it made sense to bring these the people working on these tools together with the Right to Grow, think about how might local authorities and others in practice support the Right to Grow by having the tools that would enable them to do that, and to manage shared care of public land in a way that didn't feel too onerous and didn't feel too risky or scary, or but that felt well held and felt transparent, you know, how the decisions are made around what land is made available and to who and under what agreements and all of that. There's a lot there that we'll be presenting, that communities that local authorities can work with. And what we're really looking for to come out of this is places that would be interested in piloting some of these tools with some of the practitioners that are here today. So bear that in mind as we kind of work through it. So I'm going to I think I'm going to pause there and just hand over to, actually I'm going to welcome the speakers, and maybe when I kind of say your name, you can kind of wave and let people know where you are. So Prue Elliott from Incredible Edible, who's leading on the Right to Grow campaign. We've got Julie from Octopus Communities in Islington. Hi, Julie. Emily, I don't know if Emily's here, but maybe, yes, Emily's here from Climate Action Leeds, who's been working on the mapping work in Leeds, but she's got her camera off. And Sonia, who is also here from Leeds and has been working with Emily around this. We've got Lynn Davis from Land Explorer, who's going to be talking about the mapping tool, and Dan Evans from Urban Cultivate, who will be talking about his work with Islington and with Octopus Communities about how we make decisions around how to use this land for food growing and other related functions. So I'm going to start by handing over to Prue and setting the scene with the Right to Grow. Over to you, Prue. You should be able to share and be co-host in whatever way you need.
Great, thank you, Maddie, and thank you so much for setting this up. Okay, hopefully you can see. What can you see? Can you see the Incredible Edible logo?
It's not fully, no. It's like a white strip.
Oh, okay. All right, let me stop and try again. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a bit better.
Yeah.
Ace. Okay. Brilliant. Well, hi everyone. I'm Prue and I'm here with Incredible Edible CIC today. Incredible Edible CIC is the central hub of the network of independent Incredible Edible growing groups, which are taking amazing action, growing food in the community all over the UK and well beyond as well. So at the moment, we're working on this strategy to try and radically change the opportunities that communities have to grow food and nurture wildlife in their communities. So today I'm going to be talking about our campaign to secure a right to grow, what it is, what's happening at the moment, the potential that we think there is in it, and how we want to kind of bring that vision to life through collaboration. So the right to grow is kind of what it says on the tin, really. So it's about enshrining in law a right for community groups to grow food where they live on public land that is under the care of local authorities or institutions like the NHS and MOD and things like that. So there's already loads and loads of people that want to grow food or want to participate in creating wildlife spaces, but they don't have the opportunity to do so for various reasons. And navigating the kind of legal requirements for accessing public land can be really challenging in some instances. And those kind of complicated systems can often mean that authorities are unintentionally putting barriers in the way that prevent more community growing from happening. And, you know, we really expect this challenge to increase with more people wanting to take practical action against climate change and food security and health and all of those things that, you know, Maddie was talking about earlier, but without there necessarily being more land for them to do that. And I think that affording people a right to grow really has the power to change the spaces that we live in for the better. And instead of having disused verges and unloved corners, you know, people are proving all around the country that we can have abundant spaces filled with lush plants and fruits and veggies that is also providing loads of wildlife benefits and other community benefits as well. So essentially, the right to grow is all about empowerment. It's about this shared care of public land, about reconnecting people to their food and to their health through this power of small actions. And I think it's, you know, it's fair to say that a lot of people, an increasing number of people, are feeling kind of hopeless in the shadow of issues like climate change and the cost of living crisis, but also the kind of increasing fragmentation of communities, particularly in urban spaces. But we do know that community growing is an incredibly powerful tool for addressing some of those problems, and it can give people a kind of real, meaningful and practical form of hope and action that they can take. So we have got a page on the Incredible Edible website where you can find out more about the right to grow at incredibleedible.org.uk. But I'm going to just fill you in a little bit more on some of the details. So what would a right to grow enshrined in the law look like? It would look like this. We have got a detailed legal briefing, proposed legal wording for a bill. If you're into that kind of thing, it's on the website. If legal texts are not your thing, then essentially what the law would mean is that local authorities would be required to maintain a freely available public list of all the land in its area suitable for cultivation. Ideally, that list would take the form of a map, and I know we're going to be talking more about mapping and the opportunities there. And so land that would be suitable for cultivation or environmental enhancement. The idea with this piece of legislation that would be that land is assumed to be suitable unless proven otherwise. So unless it's known that there's contamination or there's some sort of dangerous hazard or there's development work going on within the next 24 months. So once the land is identified, authorities would then be required to issue certificates of cultivation to any community interest group that applied to use the land from the list. And then the authority would define the duration of that certificate. But the idea would be that this process would not be onerous for the community groups, and that it would be straightforward and simple. And then once that community interest group has got their certificate, it's time for them to enact their right to grow and start their project without kind of fear of having to jump hoops and go through kind of complicated processes. And then finally, the law would mean that if authorities decide to sell the land, that they need to allow the community group to bid for that land if they want to. We also have a briefing for local authorities on the Incredible Edible website, which kind of lays out the benefits and the reasons for adopting a right to grow, and it includes a draft motion that councils can use if they want to adopt the right to grow. We're also happy to, if you want to get in touch, we're happy to help with things like fleshing out motion wording and stuff like that as well. So I just want to touch on some of the things that have happened so far. So we secured an amendment in the Levelling Up Bill and circulated a briefing ahead of a debate on that with support from Peers for the Planet. And I was really hoping that I would be able to give you an update today, because we were expecting the debate to happen on Monday, but unfortunately, because of the sheer volume of amendments in the bill, they didn't get to it. So we're now expecting that to happen in early June. So that's when our sponsors here, our peers, will have a chance to speak about the right to grow and have that debate, and then ultimately, hopefully, to resubmit the amendment as part of the report stage, which we're expecting to take place in the end of June. So yeah, that wouldn't mean that it would pass into legislation. It still has to go back to the Commons, even if that's successful. But yeah, now is the time, because we're expecting this debate to happen soon. I'm going to grab this opportunity. If you know any peers, now is the time to get in touch with them and ask them to support the Right to Grow amendment. If you do want to do that, I'll put my email in the chat after this, but drop me a note and I can send you our briefing, which you can pass on as well. The other exciting thing that's coming up is that Labour MP Mike Cain is going to be putting forward a 10-minute rule bill to Parliament in June. Happily, he's got support from across parties so far, and we're kind of continuing to work on getting our Incredible Edible growers from around the country to contact their MPs and urge them to support Mike Cain. So again, I'll use this opportunity to say, if you want to contact your MP and ask them to get in touch with Mike Cain and let him know that they'll support his 10-minute rule bill, that would be great. This is also sort of due to be happening in early June. And for anyone who's not sure, a 10-minute rule bill is essentially an opportunity for MPs to propose legislation in a 10-minute presentation in the Parliament. It doesn't result in that becoming law, but it's just one of those really valuable early stages in building momentum behind the kind of efforts for new legislation and raising that profile in the Parliament. So in terms of kind of potential for Right to Grow, these are just some of the potentials that we see. It can pave the way for more wildlife-friendly urban spaces. It can create more community growing projects and all of the various associated benefits that come with that for health and well-being and community cohesion and all those sorts of things. It can increase support for local supply chains, enhance the relationship between communities and the authorities that serve them. I think it's also got the potential to create opportunities for community scale peri-urban agriculture on that slightly larger scale. And alongside that, community growing is a really important entry point for creating the horticulturalists and the farmers of the future and setting people up for careers in food provision. So I think that's really valuable. And then finally, of course, more local nutrient-dense foods. And if things are done right, then that can be directed to the people who need them the most. So yeah, I think there's so much potential that goes beyond this, but these are some of the things I wanted to just touch on. So in terms of getting from where we are now to kind of where we want to be in terms of legislation, changing the law is, of course, kind of fundamental for getting that right protected. But I think there's a lot that needs to happen beforehand while we work towards that change. So, you know, we really need to secure regional right to grow policies from local authorities that can help deliver this proof of concept ahead of a wider national policy. And I think we need to really tell the stories that can kind of grow the movement, get people engaged in this, increase the interest in community growing, and help people see that the opportunities are there. And of course, to inspire policymakers as well on this. But really importantly, and part of why we're here today, is to talk about developing the tools and the resources that are going to make implementing a right to grow practical and possible and realistic. And also to ensure that it's reaching and impacting the communities who are most in need of this right to grow, and most in need of the food that it can provide. So it's not like any one group is gonna, or authority is gonna do all of these things, but I think if we work collaboratively, we can kind of bring all these different parts together and create a really powerful momentum towards this right to grow being enshrined in law, and for that to have a real impact at a local community level. So finally, I just wanted to share that the Right to Grow has some really fantastic broad support, and these are just some of the groups that are kind of pulling together behind bringing the Right to Grow to fruition. And I'll take this opportunity just to really welcome any opportunities to collaborate or just chat about this with anyone interested. As I said, I'll put my email in the chat after this, but I just really want to have conversations to understand the challenges and the opportunities that this can kind of present for local authorities, and how we can work towards this in a way that allows us to present kind of solutions and make things practical and possible as we move forwards. So yeah, that's it from me, and I'll pass back to you, Maddie. Thanks.
Thanks, Prue. Thank you. That's brilliant. An amazing piece of work. Does anyone have any clarifying questions or reactions at this stage for Prue about any of that? You can just say or put things in the chat. Great. Okay. So we wanted also to bring to life for everyone a bit, but the sort of the perspective from the ground, as it were, of these kind of initiatives and possibilities. And so I wanted to welcome Dan Robinson to talk a bit about the Leeds context, the Right to Grow, and he's coordinating Incredible Edible in Leeds. And then we'll go to you, Julie, afterwards in Islington to talk about your experience there. So over to Dan.
Thanks, Maddie. Yeah, it's great to see some familiar faces on the call, actually. And Incredible Edible Leeds, for those that don't know, was born essentially out of communities wanting a right to grow. When we created Incredible Edible in Garforth, in East Leeds, many other areas of Leeds asked us how we did it. And we quickly realised that they were likely to, or already were facing some of the barriers that we did. And I think processes are in place for good reason, but as Prue alluded to, often communities are inadvertently put off by red tape. Things like insurance and governance and risk assessments that need to be in place, but that's often a barrier before a state even goes in the ground. So we created Incredible Edible Leeds as that umbrella organisation to support people across the city to grow their food in public places, and that provides a structure for communities, but it also provides that assurance for the local authority that a single entity is kind of handling that risk and managing the expectations, dealing with any issues. And I just want to thank some of the people on this call actually for helping to make that happen, because I've seen unused and unloved spaces turned into edible landscapes. We've seen whole streets full of produce grown by families in raised beds. We've seen tomatoes at train stations, beans at bus stops, lettuce at libraries. And Leeds is a great example of what can happen when communities work together with the public sector and third sector and local authorities, when they all come together to find solutions for challenges like this. And I'm really proud that Leeds is providing such great leadership in creating a sustainable food movement. That's kind of a little bit of a whistle stop in terms of Leeds, how we came about an incredible edible project. And we've got lots of different areas of the city growing food at the moment, but we do often still face the same kind of barriers that hopefully a right to grow would solve. I don't know if anyone's got any questions. Otherwise, I can hand over to Julie. Okay, Julie, over to you, I think.
So we're just working out how to share the screen. So we'll just be with you shortly. I've got a little presentation. Yeah. We're just getting past our security. Nearly there.
So I just say Rosie's just put a question in the chat. Saying, will groups need to be formally constituted as community interest groups or other kind of formal constitution? So maybe that's something you might be able to speak to, Julie, or anybody else.
I'm
I
really
can speak to. Oh,
Sorry.
sorry, go on, Julie.
No, I was going to say I'm really sorry. I had prepared a presentation, but our security just won't let us share our screen right now. So I'll just read the slides.
Is it something that you can email to me and then I can share it?
And I can easily share it with you. Or
Yeah, and then I can try and I'll bring it up.
Absolutely. So yes, sorry everyone. So I'm Julie Parish. I'm from Octopus Community Network, and we are a network of 15 large multi-purpose community centres in Islington. We've had an urban growing programme in Islington for over 12 years now. And that was really sparked from lots of reports, over 10 years ago, really citing key worries around urban children, urban communities having really low level environmental literacy. So that became our real impetus to do something. Really through the need and demand from communities, that interest became very place-based. So people wanted to learn where they lived. Originally, we thought about getting people out to open spaces, green spaces, and that there was a huge interest in that. But that interest just sparked a desire for people to grow more locally. We then started developing a really good and long-lasting relationship with Islington Council, which I've found to be fantastic in terms of overcoming some of those barriers that people have already mentioned. We work also with so that was Parks and Public Realm, but we also work very closely with housing, because in Islington, In London, we are the least green borough of all the Islington, the London boroughs, which means we've got very little green space in which to grow. So when you talk about land to grow, we actually haven't got very much land at all. And that land tends to be earmarked for housing development, because there's great pressure on housing as well. So I think that just flags up a really interesting discussion about how planning permission and the building of houses integrates a more urban agritecture approach rather than just always seeking space and land to grow. But that's another discussion. Where we have found a real interest is that there's actually 57 acres of land in Islington, which is located on housing estates, which we think is a really untapped potential. So 57 acres in a borough that has got a shortage of land, that's phenomenal. So if we can actually, talking about what Prue's been mentioning there about how we could just unlock that space for public use. But we've also found that with communities who have lived on these estates for many years, that whole no ball games, don't sit on the grass, don't use the grass, it puts up those barriers that really now needs that behavioural and attitudinal change from local authorities to actually say these spaces are public spaces, people want to grow in these spaces. And I think this is just being emphasised through what we learned through COVID, and that immediate breakdown of the food systems. And especially in London, and I can imagine other cities across the country would argue the same, but we actually felt it in London because all of our food comes in from elsewhere. So I think there's a real strong argument, and it's fantastic to hear from Incredible Edible and what they're trying to do. Incredible Edible was one of our go-to places as well for examples of what can happen in spaces that don't require lots of land. So I'm in agreement with everything that's being said so far, but I think there's conditions for success that need to be in place. I said our relationship with Parks and Public Realm has been an open door relationship, and their approach is a yes before it's a no. So it's very welcoming, very open. But because we've worked increasingly with housing, because we've wanted to grow on this land on housing estates, housing is something else. They're a much more risk averse team. They're always worried about challenges, the legality, the ongoing consultation with residents. So when working with councils, we've found that you've got a really open door, welcoming, let's try and do this, but then with housing, something much more, actually you've got to keep pushing it at that door. So I would say these conditions for success, working in a cross-sectoral way, is about building relationships. And you just have to keep going all the time and prove that these kinds of initiatives work and they are long lasting. But there's another side of the coin always, because we've got a very transient community in Islington. So lots of refugee and migrant communities come, they get very enthused about being able to grow on their housing estate, but then those communities are moved on. So, we've put the time, effort, the impetus into these growing spaces, but the families who have been interested in that are moved on sometimes within 12 to 18 months, which means then you've got to start rebuilding a brand new community. But in terms of going through the conditions for success, it's that enthusiasm. You can't kind of squash that. And just like Prue and I think it was Dan who mentioned this before, you can't squash that enthusiasm, and some of the red tape that we've faced with communities can really put people off. We've often acted as in that honest broker role, because communities, if they just see loads of really efficient looking forms or processes, they then kind of go, oh, we just don't want to do this. We don't want to have insurance and things like that. We don't want to constitute ourselves. All we want to do is grow food. So in that honest broker role, we've acted as that go-between between the communities and the local authority, which is actually worked really, really well. In terms of our fourth kind of, third and fourth, which are kind of very similar condition for success, is you have to have the community leaders who are forming that activism role. They're forming movements, they're pushing forward, because that community voice is just so incredibly important. So I can't emphasize that enough. You have to garner that interest from people. You need to give them the right space and place to create those movements. My colleague Rosie, who's sitting in the background here, we had the Action for Local Food project, which was a Climate Action Fund funded project through the National Lottery as a development project for 18 months. It was incredible how, you know, people just gathered around, created movements, got enthused about growing food for social good. And we've seen a huge interest in younger people wanting to know more about how they can grow in their local community. And it's been quite impressive how their interest has been in growing food for families, but growing food for social good. So identifying those groups that have a common interest, you building that enthusiasm is just really it's so important. Part of that Action for Local Food project was a real ambitious desire to really shake Islington Council into reviewing their food policy. And even though lots of people told me at the beginning that it would never happen in 18 months, I'm really pleased to tell you that we did shake the council up a little bit. We got them to realise that their food policy was like 2012, and we are now in 2022 at the time. And Rosie's here as a representative of our team on the Islington Food Partnership. Rosie?
Hi everyone. So yeah, the Food Partnership is a kind of collective of organisations across the borough who all have some interest in food. So there's growers, there's also community centres that do like food provision, local businesses and representatives from the council. And we've been working over the last 18 months-ish to rewrite the borough's food strategy, which was published in March. We celebrated with the first ever Islington Food Week, which was great. But that kind of incorporates everything to do with food, but also there's a whole like climate section which has ambitions and targets for the council and for the borough to encourage growing and kind of be producing more food in the borough for the people who really need it as well.
Thanks, Rosie. And just to finish off, really, so I wanted to give that example, is that because we're a tiny little charity in Islington, but we often get told we punch above our weight. You have to be ambitious to really shake people up and do something and not just whinge about a crisis, but to actually do something about it. So to just close our little presentation or examples is we actually worked with Parks and Public Realm around a community-led growing strategy and action plan, which they have now, I would say, like probably 90% adopted, and it's informed their Islington Greening Together programme of work and Islington Champions programme. And I would say our guiding principles for our work is really about rethinking the public realm and how that can really be transformed to enable people, local residents, to grow, how we should support movements and activism around food growing, but also reinvigorating that sense of citizenship, that these are public spaces that are for public use, and we should just go out. We've supported loads of guerrilla gardening over the years, and I'm pleased to say that often the council has been supportive of that. We also get told a lot of the time that we can't grow in the ground because of contamination levels, but I'd like to challenge that. You know, there needs to be a proper program around investing in soil science. Let's focus on plot-based soil rejuvenation. How do we get that soil tested? How do we have a longer term program for making sure we can grow in the ground? Because growing in raised beds is really, really hard work, but you know, we could actually go around just looking at soil and soil management. And then finally, similar, you know, to what the other two presenters said, let's invest in jobs and skills. When we were recruiting for our Action for Local Food project, through 2 rounds of recruitment, we had about 600 applicants, which was incredible, phenomenal. Gave us a lot of hard work to choose the right people, but we had only 1 application from Islington, which was, and we as a small charity, we like to invest in local people and offer local jobs for local people. 1 job applicant out of that 600. So we really need to do something around promoting that there are jobs within urban agriculture, and this is a trend that is going to go forward. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. Amazing work, and for sharing all those insights. It's really interesting to hear about, you know, the interest among young people, particularly something I've been thinking about quite a lot recently. The energy there is really rising on many fronts, I think. And that the role as the sort of honest broker role is also another thing I've been thinking about. Who's that sort of trusted intermediary that brings the threads together and kind of can sort of build those relationships and unburden people from some of those things which have been more cumbersome or clunky or harder to navigate or inaccessible even, in trying to make things happen. And soils, absolutely. We know a lot now about different ways of decontaminating land and building living soils. Been part of the community composting stuff setting up in Bristol, and there's a whole kind of mycelium compost network, and that's working to do with the work of around the soil food web and all of that, which is really, really rising at the moment and spreading in the way that mycelium does. And so I'm really happy to sort of put you in touch with any of those guys as well.
That would be amazing. We've just started a brand new project, and we're calling it the urban soil farmer project. So
amazing. Any
connections that anyone has, that it would be amazing to be put in contact. That's great. I will share the slides with you, Maddie. It's got a link to the Action for Local Food project and our website as well. So thank you.
Brilliant. And well done, Islington, for being so urban and so densely packed and still finding a way to pioneer things in this space. It's really inspiring. So thank you. I'm just going to move on to invite Emily and Sonia to talk a bit about your experience with Leeds, and starting to kind of look at what land is available and how to map it and make that inquiry about how do we find out what land we have and what to do with it. So perspective from the kind of Emily, who's leading on the mapping, and Sonia, who leads up the food partnership there. So over to you guys, and maybe we'll have 5 to 10 minutes.
Shall I start, Sonia?
Okay.
So I've put together a few slides. So I'm just going to share. do, do, do. Let's see. Can you see the screen all right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So so our mapping project is across a few organizations that are listed there. I'm part of Seaconomics and Climate Action Leads. And basically, I mean, we've already heard today why the importance of mapping, but it has been really highlighted in Leeds that access to land is a major barrier to increase local food production. And Leeds City Council is also a large public landowner. So there are opportunities to increase food production in Leeds. There's also a vibrant network of growers that we've heard already. Dan talked about Incredible Edibles work in Leeds. And there are also a few policies that are very promising in terms of putting bringing mapping as a strategy to increase local food production. And so there's the Leeds local plan that has been recently updated, and in there it's really identified that public land should benefit local communities and support other climate and social objectives. We have also a growing network around the strategy of community wealth building. One of the main pillars of community wealth building is the socially just use of land and assets. So as part of that, we should expect that land is directed towards community benefits. So our objectives with this project is mainly threefold. The main thing we'd like is to have an open access map that is listing all publicly owned land in Leeds suitable for growing food, but not only food, growing trees or anything else as well. On this map, we'd like to feature community growing projects that are already happening in Leeds, commercial farms, as well as in the future have the ability to directly request access to lands through the council. But that's kind of a long-term feature, but we believe this would be essential to make it accessible to people and democratic. And yes, we want to create a community of land mappers. That doesn't only mean that people using using mapping land via mapping software, but also going out in their community and gathering really important data about the state of the land in order to so-called ground truth the maps, because often what is on the map doesn't fit the reality. And we also, very importantly, need new land government and management structures, and that's something that has been talked about already this morning. The need to make it easier for groups to access land while ensuring that this meets the requirements of the council in terms of liability and discharging statutory obligations as well. So far, we've had our main public event discussing mapping land in Leeds back in September, so that feels already like quite a while ago. And Maddie was there as well, and we had a few other organizations. We have been sourcing public land data from the council, have set up a small community of interested mappers via an email list, and since we had this event in September. And we have been working with the people behind Land Explorer, which is an open access land mapping platform that we'll be hearing from Lynn later on, to facilitate different feature, to unlock different feature on that mapping software, and based on what we need for our project. And one important feature that is now available is the ability to map as a community, so to use not only one user of the map, but different users can use it together. So that makes it very democratic and accessible. And last but not least, we have been filling in many funding applications because this is a big project. Mapping is very labor intensive, and this, as you saw, there's many different elements of this project. So we need funding to scale this up. At the minute, we can't move further with this if we don't have any money on for this project. But yeah, so I'll just finish off by saying that what we need from the council is really to confirm that this data that we have sourced we can use it, because there are some issues around copyright, and we'll probably hear that around the challenges of open access mapping later on. We need also Leeds councillors to actively support the Right to Grow bill and get behind mapping as an essential part of it. And like I said, we need to unlock funding to really scale this project. Yeah, so I'll stop sharing. And if you have any question, yeah, please share.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Emily. Sonia, did you want to add anything at this stage, or do you want to?
Sure, I will come in. I'll come in
later.
here for a couple of minutes. It's really great to actually have such a strong Leeds representation today. So I coordinate Foodwise, which is the food partnership for the city, and we've been going since 2017, and even before that in a non-paid capacity. So we spent a long time building up partnerships and relationships with council and third sector and other organisations across the city, which has been really helpful. And we've spent the last 18 months working very closely with Leeds City Council and other strategic partners across the city to develop a food strategy. And the Right to Grow just really fits into this food strategy really well, and it's really cross-cutting. So the way the Leeds food strategy is set up, we've got health and well-being, we've got food access and economy, and then we've got sustainability and resilience. And having this Right to Grow, having more spaces where community can come together and grow food really supports each of these key thematic areas. And it'd be really wonderful to get more galvanization around this and really help to roll it out across the city. And then we can really map the benefits of this will have on the population of Leeds, especially in the areas of greatest needs. And I'd just like to thank we've got 2 councillors on the call today and from different parties as well. So that partnership work is really key. So yeah, it's good. Thank you.
That is really exciting. That yeah, like you say, there is such great representation here from Leeds, and it makes me think that we need to just get on and find whatever funding we need to collaborate and bring this to life in Leeds. I think all the pieces are in place for that to happen. Fantastic. So it's just we're going to just move now from stories of things happening on the ground and impacts on the ground to take a more in-depth look at a couple of the tools that are being used to make all this happen. So how do we make it happen? How do we manage? What tools might we use to manage shared care of public land for food growing? And like Julie said, yeah, really remembering that public land is not land that's on a list to become private land, even though we've seen so much of that happen, so much loss of public land to the private sector, whether that's very kind of locally in urban centres or county farms, the sell-off of county farms. Same with institutions, the church and others having to just sort of selling off land in order to kind of keep afloat as a sort of quick income. Local authorities having to do that, and the kind of years of austerity have really resulted in this sort of loss of land, which also means the loss of the capacity to do good. So it's time to sort of, yeah, turn that on its head and remember that public land is about the commons and about sovereignty and about energizing and activating communities to be able to meet their own needs, self-provisioning, collective provisioning, and that's a hugely untapped resource that we need to start tapping if we're going to, be able to sort of build the rafts we need and crack the kind of build the resilience that we need. So I'm really excited to invite Lynn into the space to talk about the Land Explorer tool, which is developed in the space of kind of open source technology, community tech, to really enable the work of bringing land into the commons in a way that communities can engage with data and engage more in the places where they live as kind of active agents. So over to you, Lynn.
Thanks, Maddie. Yeah, and it's so nice to hear all these stories from you amazing folks working on the ground at the moment. It definitely reminds me of when I was hunting for land around Bristol to keep goats on, and we were it was a really interesting process. I was very fortunate that both in Bristol and South Gloss councils there were quite active people in the parks team who wanted to support, and I think that's so often the case. There's people really want to in council make good things happen, but like the reality of that is that an individual person was like traveling with myself to a piece of land to show me a piece of land, and like sure this was a few years ago, maybe there weren't a lot of people looking for land, but we don't start a whole movement when it has to be someone's job to drive with you to any individual piece of land, because we can do that ourselves. We can have a look at this land, we can gather some of the data. So and I remember the person in South Gloss Council telling me that they had like tens of thousands of pieces of land on a list. Some of those were like road verges and things like this that they had to maintain, but there's a lot of data out there, and there isn't a single answer. I think it's not like we just need a big list, because often it doesn't exist as a big list. He was telling me about how much work he had to do to make it a big list, and nearly spilled my tea, and also like how can we actually gather some of this data together from people who are out there and just seeing the pieces of land near them. So I'm just going to share my screen. And my computer is also being very slow, so hopefully this doesn't just crash everything. This is Land Explorer, and I'm just going to, for those of you who've used it, you might notice things looking a little different at the moment. We're trying to turn it more into a collaborative tool, like you might expect from a collaborative document. So the UX is changing, but for those who aren't familiar, it's that, don't worry, not missing anything. So what I wanted to do is just show an example of what can be done now with Land Explorer, and in when we have these opportunities for councils and community organizations to work together. And this is bringing together some of the data that I think Alison's still here from the call, and Gary was here before, but by Social Farms and Gardens working with councils across Wales to try and collect this data, and we can now see allotment data on our map like this. Zooming in, you can see different patches with a little bit of data about it, community allotments. But what we can also do now is actually go in, and if there's more data to share on this, edit it and add it in. So this data is available to people who are part of the Resilient Green Spaces group. It's not, and this is like this is another tool that we have to explore, who can edit the data, who can see the data. So it can be a way to help get around licensing things as well. If it's not completely public, then sometimes that helps to get around certain licensing issues on data like this. So, you know, I think the most complex part of this whole process was getting the data in the first place from councils. After that, it was simply kind of uploading into spreadsheets, getting this data live on here, and then enabling people to access it, edit it, add information if they have it. And in this way, this map of different community gardens, CSAs, allotments is building up across Wales, and it's quite inspiring to see the different examples. Certainly down near where I live, down in north edge of the valleys, we've been using this to try and understand where there are allotments and growing spaces, where there might be extra surplus food that we can help redistribute and exchange through the community. So it's, you know, there's a lot of gold in here and a lot of resource. The other thing that we can do with this data then, if there are edits made by groups who are kind of coming in at maybe adding boundaries to this, so because right now they're mostly markers, but we can turn them into actual boundaries, like polygon data with boundaried edges, so you can start to build up data on things like total area, that's allotments, total area for community gardens, and some of that can be really quite helpful data when it comes to making your case, you know, politically, or starting to build evidence around the value of these spaces. And it's not just a one-way street, you know, taking this data, so we can start to make this data more widely available to who needs it, or to populate this further and feed it back into council data. So you can export, say you go through, your group does a bit of work mapping in the local area, boots on the ground. This data can then be exported as a shapefile, which we know is really useful for like a lot of council systems interoperate with this format, or also the more general GeoJSON format, which can then has better compatibility for turning into lots of other GIS formats, because obviously, like anything in tech, there's a whole bunch of different formats that with various levels of interoperability. So yeah, create on top of this, kind of sharing snapshots of your data, sharing your maps that you create with other people, and coming soon, embedding these maps into your own website so you can better tell your story about it. Also coming soon, the ability to add more complex, more interesting descriptions and things. You can start to add images, videos, formatting so that it's easier to navigate things. So kind of adding that storytelling side to it as well. And I think, you know, a tool like this, it is open source. So we believe that, you know, it's not just about having land held in commons, but it's about all of our technology being in commons, you know, like technology, when it's used to profit individuals, is extractive and adds to inequality, but technology doesn't have to be like that. We can hold it and manage it in the commons. And, you know, there's a lot of similarities to land when you start to think of it like that. And so this is why we believe that open source software is important. You know, you can go on, find the code, it's on GitHub. I can share links if anyone's interested. You can suggest and make improvements there. So yeah, and you know, if for some reason the organizations involved in Land Explorer stop being organizations, the code doesn't go anywhere. Someone can pick it up and still launch it again. So yeah, it's a little introduction to Land Explorer, and that's probably enough from me. Happy to answer questions, but perhaps we'll do questions after we hear from Dan as well.
I was wondering, Maddie, could I just come in really quickly from the other side of Lynn's presentation?
Yeah,
because it's been great working with Lynn and the team at Digital Commons. I think one of our biggest barriers there has just been lack of capacity and lack of time. Like, you start mapping and then you're like, oh, we need to map this and this and this, and oh, hang on, these people need this information. So it's very much been a starting point, and we had a bit of capacity for mapping within the project, but not as much as I would have liked to have kind of this far down the line. So it's certainly something we'd like to continue. But just in terms of that exporting the data, because one of the things we're really aware of is public sector has very limited capacity, as you know, as does everyone else really. So that data that Lynn showed there, we exported that in a shapefile and shared it with Cardiff Council, and so they've been able to use that And yeah, like Lynn was saying, it's really powerful for the voice of community to be able to share what data we do have, and hopefully we can build on that as well. And Lynn, it's exciting to see the new developments and look forward to hopefully doing something with them as well. So thanks for that.
Oh, thanks, Alison. And yeah, it's actually really valuable to raise. Like, there are so many blockers to sharing this data, and I guess that's something I'd really love to learn more about, particularly from, well, anyone who has, you know, some kind of data that they'd like to make more readily accessible. What are the barriers to that? Why is that difficult? Because I think there are groups and organizations that can really support that process, so we can explore further.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Alison. Yeah, Alison's been coordinating the Resilient Green Spaces, or parts of it, across Wales. So it's great to hear from you as well, Alison. Yeah, and I think there's something about the maps have a slightly extraordinary power, I think, whether they're digital or actually paper maps. In terms of, I don't know, they wake up something in people around their sense of belonging and connectedness to place, which I think is a really critical piece in all of this, where particularly in urban areas, patterns of development mean that we're quite sort of dislocated, as it were, disconnected, or the sort of the patterns of the landscape are kind of invisible generally as we go about our business, and our environments are very sort of cut up, but nonetheless we have a relationship to them, and some maps have this, and working with and around maps collaboratively has a really interesting way of helping us to reimagine the possibilities of our places and the interconnectedness of the spaces that we encounter every day. On that note, I would love to pass over to you, Dan. So with the right to grow, what a local authority might start with is the ideas and the kind of belief in the right to grow as a concept, and then start to go, okay, what land do we have? And that's where the mapping comes in. And then once you understand what land there is, or you start to kind of get a picture of the physical land possibilities, then comes that really critical piece about how do you make decisions about those bits of land, and how do you weight those decisions? And that's a really critical piece. And again, when managed well and with the right tools, enables these critical conversations to happen between local authority and communities in a way that perhaps is quite difficult now, in terms of that real sharing of power and responsibility and accountability around the management and care of spaces. So really exciting that Dan, along with Julie and Islington Council, has been developing the Urban Cultivate programme. So over to you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Maddie, and yeah, very good morning to everyone here on the call. And it's been wonderful the last hour or so to really find out a little bit more about the right to grow outside of London, which is where I've been focusing the work over the last year or so in Urban Cultivate. So it's really good to hear see the links developing across the country. So we've heard from Julie. Thank you, Julie, and the Octopus team, giving a brief snapshot of some of the real momentum that's been created in London Borough of Islington. And I want to just follow that by sharing some slides and a little presentation on what we've done in the Urban Cultivate project over the last year or so. So Just to introduce myself, for those who've not met me before, either online or in person, my name's Dan Evans. I'm a soil scientist at Cranfield University. We're a postgraduate university about an hour north of London. And I'm particularly keen to hear and encouraged to hear of some of the soil quality issues being discussed earlier. But I lead quite a wide-ranging team. It's a multi-sector team. We have Russell, Brent and Abdul from Agritecture Global, Dr. Peter Hurley and Joseph Starkey from University of Sussex, and Kelly Fagan-Robinson, who has just joined the team representing University of Cambridge. And Urban Cultivate, in a sense, came about really because we identified a few issues in urban food growing, and those are kind of displayed here on the slide. So the first main issue that we'd identified is that, yes, food growing is concentrated on a limited number of sites. In most towns and cities, we have the allotment, the community garden. Food growing is squashed into these spaces, and that often leads to the soils being overworked and limited accessibility to these sites as well. It means that if there's one or two allotments on the west of the city and you're on the east, you have to travel across to get there. So we find an issue around distribution of food growing sites. The second issue is around function. So when we do have areas designated for food growing, many of these sites are specifically designed for just that, for food growing alone. And very little space is given for the other really important functions of the food supply chain, things like waste collection and soil formation and composting, the development of seedlings, that area that you need to start chitting those potatoes or propagating the food that you want to grow. So it's not just about cultivating, it's about all of the other functions that take place in and around that. And of course, one of the real important aspects of a local urban food supply system is the food exchange and the vending. And it's not just about exchanging food, but exchanging knowledge and experience and skill sets as well. So that's also an area which requires land. As much as cultivation is important, we have to think of those other functions. And then third, but by no means least, the connectivity between these sites. So many food growing functions are often displaced outside of the city altogether. Waste composting and waste collection, and often food exchange takes place outside of the area where the food is grown. So we need to connect all of these up locally to create that sustainable and resilient food supply chain. So what Urban Cultivate does is propose a solution to tackle these three things by identifying and connecting urban spaces into a cluster, and most importantly, designating each space within that cluster a function, a specific role to carry out the food supply chain. What we're not saying is that one space has to do everything, but a collection of spaces, if they're clustered well together and optimized, can create that local circular system. And we've done that by creating the Urban Cultivate dashboard, which I'll demonstrate in just a moment. So this really came out of a proof of concept project funded by one of the UK research councils, the Science and Technology Facilities Council, STFC, and their food network has a real vibrant array of projects around the UK at the moment, focusing on sustainable and resilient food supply. So this was funded by them as a kind of phase one of Urban Cultivate's lifespan. So there's four real kind of key steps in our model. The first is, and as we've already discussed this morning, identifying and mapping the sites that you want to consider. And these could be existing sites, but what we were focusing on this project was the underutilized areas, the spaces that Julie was mentioning earlier, in between buildings and in the estates, which are often on the outside of any designation. They're not designated as green space. They're too small to be designated for future housing development. So these spaces, these verges, these areas, these patches are underutilized, and we were focusing on those. The second step is collecting data. So we go into these spaces and really do a kind of ground-based survey of the space itself. We really try to understand the area from within it rather than outside it. Although, you know, quite a lot of data now is accessible from the desk. So we do partner up our on-the-ground studies with some desk-based assessments using the data sets that Lynn was just talking about a minute ago. And then third, we bring all that data together and we calculate basically the suitability of each of the sites for a different food growing function, all the way from waste collecting, soil formation, cultivation, seedling development, and food exchange. And once we've calculated the suitability scores, we display those graphically and I would say in an easy to visualize way on a user-friendly dashboard. And that's the final product that came out of this proof of concept project. And we honed in using the London Borough of Islington as a real exciting case study for this project. Islington, as Julie has been mentioning, is a really crowded borough, really densely packed. And almost a third of the borough's households have no private outdoor space. It really emphasizes the need to use the available space. And of course, as Julie says, and as I added quickly to my slide, 57 acres around the housing estates for public use. That's an extraordinary amount of area to think about. So working with Octopus and really supported by Octopus all the way from application stage onwards, we've been mapping sites in and around the Octopus Community Plant Nursery, which is zoomed in here on the bottom right of this slide. So this is a space that we've been using as a kind of central hub in and around this area. We've been focusing on mapping and identifying vacant sites. And this is what that looks like in practice. So on the slide, you might get to see this space here labeled number 98, this circle here. This is actually the community plant nursery run by Octopus for the local community. And we started clustering vacant and underutilized spaces in and around this area in around the Tufnell Park ward. You can see that graphically below. And once we've done that, then we go in and collect our data, and these are the data sets that we've been focusing on. So we focused on some of the microclimate, which is obviously very important, not just for food growing, but clearly for composting as well. We need to find spaces which are environmentally suitable for all of the functions. So temperature, precipitation, sunlight hours. We've been focusing in on air quality. You can see my little air quality monitor on the bottom of the slide. And well, being a soil scientist, I couldn't obviously miss the soil out, could I? So we focused on soil quality, some key aspects there of soil quality. And then we brought in our partners, as I say, from Agritecture Global, who are experts in spatial data and analysis. So we were looking at how integrated some sites are with pedestrian networks and somewhat segregated or isolated from pedestrian networks. That's that little figure that looks like a spider's web in the slide. And then we also focused on area of space, the shape of the space, and the proximity to utilities. And all of these data have their own spreadsheet in a sense. So we need to find a way of bringing all that together. And that's what we've done here on the dashboard. What we do on the dashboard is 4 really simple steps. We we feed the dashboard some IDLE values, the things that we'd want from all of the different criteria that we've measured. So the ideal soil pH, for example, the ideal temperature for composting. And we do that for all of the food growing functions, all the way from waste collecting to food exchange. We then feed the data that we've collected from the sites into the dashboard. And what the dashboard then does is it compares the ideal values with the data that we've fed it from each of the sites. And it calculates on its own, in a matter of seconds really, a suitability score. So how effective the site would be to carry out each of those food growing functions. And you can imagine that a site next to a road might be really good for food exchange, but perhaps poor for cultivating food, perhaps because of the air pollution. So the dashboard is clever enough to work all of that out based on the data that we give it. And then the final aspect of all this is presenting that in a user-friendly way. So we've been developing with the University of Sussex a map that indicates the suitable functions based on those suitability scores. And just for the area that we've focused in here on Islington, we found that, as we might expected, the largest space next to the pedestrian and transport network was dedicated for food exchange. And we've got a selection of smaller spaces south of Tufnell Park Road for waste collecting and seedling development. So we can use the dashboard to calculate that, but we can also weight certain criteria. Let's say that we really want the soil pH to be exactly 7.5. We can actually increase the importance of this on the dashboard. So you can play around, it's quite interoperable. Finally, we've worked with stakeholders all the way throughout this process, from the very first meet and greet event you can see on the left that we held last July, all the way through the year. We've been working with the community and also with Islington Borough Council in every step of the way. And my thanks obviously to those members of both the public realm and also the housing team that have helped us here. But essentially, we've realised that what the dashboard doesn't necessarily do is tap into what the people in the community want or don't want for their local area. So we've supplemented our dashboard work with a community open day we held last month, and that went really well. We heard from the community, and it turns out that a lot of the spaces that the dashboard designated were indeed favourable for those people. And the other aspect of this is all the way through this reporting back and working with the local committee. So for instance, I've been invited twice to the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee, and this has allowed almost uniquely an ability for the project to tap into the expertise on the council and learn more about how decisions are made. So you can find out more information here on our Urban Cultivate website. We've just launched this in the last month. It's still a kind of work in development, and we update this periodically, but please do have a look at this. I'll share the details in the chat, and we'd very much love to hear from you. Urban Cultivate is now progressing from a research project into a service that we will provide local councils across the UK. So if you're interested in finding out how the dashboard can work with your particular area in mind, then please do reach out, and we're very much looking forward to hearing your questions and comments. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing and I'll hand back to Maddie.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dan. It's such a important piece of work, and yeah, great how much collaboration there's been, really, what you highlighted with Octopus and with the council and the housing team also being sort of involved in that. Think about their 57 acres in a new way, and actually then here's the tools that will enable you to think about it in a new way. I think that's such a critical piece. So we've got about half an hour left, and really wanted to spend this time sort of inviting questions from anyone in the room about what you've heard, about how these tools might be implemented in practice in your place, maybe what you might see existing barriers as being, or anything that's come up really. Any clarifying questions or reactions, because I think it'd be great to have out of this some next steps in terms of developing these tools in place collaboratively, and under the kind of, in the context of the right to grow now, which adds great sort of impetus on the ground and politically. And it also, all of it speaks to the kind of the language that's used around food sovereignty, which is about food for people and the value of providers and localizing systems and local control, building knowledge and skills, and working with nature. There was one question that came up from Rosie. Rosie, do you want to put your camera on, or ask your question to Dan directly? I think you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I had it unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Because my microphone doesn't always work. I was just wondering about, I mean, obviously you're doing it in principle, Dan, you're not actually practically on the ground doing it, but are you assuming that your soil enhancing approach on the land that you're talking about mapping would be organic rather than agrochemical methods? And you haven't mentioned biodiversity, but presumably if you are doing that, that would enhance the biodiversity as well.
Yeah, so they're really important questions. Thank you, Rosie. I was just about typing the response, but really happy to answer here. So yeah, on the enhancing soil quality, I think there's a real need now to invest in invest more in the ability to create our own composts as organically as possible, of course, in these local spaces. There's much waste being generated, often not collected, and often actually, as I said before, exported outside of the urban space. That's certainly the case, for example, for much of Islington. And there's a real need, I think, to keep hold of some of that, to create compost and improve the provision of locally formed soils. Obviously, I agree with the earlier comments, I think, made by Julie, that we need to periodically test the soil quality to make sure that it's safe for food growing. The biodiversity one is really important. So we really kind of came up with a series of starting criteria, but by no means were these exhaustive. Biodiversity is really important. What we don't obviously want to do is take a space out of being a biodiverse area and create a situation where we reduce biodiversity. So we, all the way through this, we need to make sure that we're only enhancing the environmental quality in all of these areas. So biodiversity would be a key metric to measure in the future, and that's certainly something I'll take back to the Urban Cultivate Board. Thank you for your questions.
Brilliant, thanks, Dan. Yeah, I wonder if there's any thoughts going from the guys from Leeds, maybe a councillor's perspective. Katie, yeah.
Hi everybody. Yeah, a few comments really rather than questions. My name's Katie Dye. I'm a councillor for Killingbeck and Seacroft, which is a ward in east of Leeds. I also chair our Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. So I've kind of got two hats really in terms of being here today, in terms of things I wanted to learn. So just some comments really, first of all, with my community hat on. So I'm part of Climate Action Seacroft, which is a group that sits under the umbrella of Climate Action Leeds. And I just wanted to respond to the comments that came from Julie in Islington, and just say that up here in sunny Leeds, it's exactly the same in terms of the barriers we face. So we've had a really enthusiastic group set up from Climate Action Seacroft wanting to grow, and we found a patch of land, and the biggest barrier to it was the fact that it was housing land, and initially the response was no, you can't do that, and it took an awful battle really to get that off the ground. You talked about red tape putting people off, and you know, you're absolutely right, it did, when people found that, you know, we had to have safeguarding policies and all these policies about using tools. People just wanted to get onto the land and get digging. But we persevered, and we've got a fabulous space. And that you were absolutely right when you said we need to think about building relationships, because I think that's one of the things that's been really key to us. I mean, you've heard from a few people in Leeds, but I think that there's some really good relationships developing between the council, Climate Action Leeds, Foodwise, Incredible Edible. Yeah, it's something that's helped to drive a lot of the things forward. With my kind of more citywide hat on, really, I'm really keen to support Emily in any way I can with the land mapping. So please get in touch with me. One of the things that I've just been working on over the last few days is drawing up the plan for all our SEAC meetings over the next year. And one of the things I've put on there as an agenda item is community growing. So I think that's something that we can visit in Leeds in more detail at a meeting. So please get in touch with me, and we'll look to get that into the meeting schedule. And then the land tool, fascinating. I've already opened it on my links, and I'll have a look at that. Dan, your work really interests me. I've just finished 30 years as a science teacher, so your obsession with soil and pH and all of that lot really kind of, oh yes, that sounds really interesting. I don't know whether there's any work we can do in Leeds, but I would be really happy to look at any way we can support it. I think it really interesting way of looking at the land that we've got and the best use of it, because one thing that certainly in my ward I've been really keen to support is the use of growing spaces in a way that people in the community want to use them, but the idea of being more clearly defined about what's the best use for that land really hadn't occurred to me, and I think it's something that we could seriously consider. So that's just a few thoughts from me, really.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Katie. And just want to quickly turn, before I come to you, Julie, just a couple of things in the chat, if I may. Unless it was a direct point that you wanted to make in response.
Yeah, just very briefly to basically say the experience that we had with Dan and his team has been really incredible, and it opens up conversations that we've never been able to have before. What we've got the community behind us, we've got that community voice, but what we've never had is the science and technology know-how or the clout of science and technology. And I think the two come together. I couldn't advocate for enough, because it changes the conversation, it weights the conversation. but equally as well, it actually manages expectation, because what we often face is communities asking us, or the council asking us, to go and help communities look at the space where they want to grow. And unfortunately, a lot of time we're kind of going, you'll not actually be able to grow tomatoes there. So this too actually really sets the scene for being able to have open and frank conversations. So I would say, if anyone's really interested in it, it's fascinating just to take the conversation from a different perspective.
Wonderful. That's what these sessions are, you know, what makes them so worthwhile, really. Yeah, just I'll read out just a comment from Alison at Resilient Green Spaces. She had to go. She might have seen. She says, as far as I know, Shropshire County Council have adopted Right to Grow, but have passed the responsibility for mapping down to parish and town councils. So just a bit cautious about Right to Grow if it means putting an additional burden on already stretched local authorities. As much support as we can give through our mapping and other tools is really important. So yes, definitely. I think the purpose is to unburden councils and to come together as sort of collaborations to seek funding from elsewhere, to kind of so it's not beholden on the local authority and the local authority budget alone to make all this stuff happen. This is the point of bringing us all together. And I'd love to invite Emma into the space. It's really nice to see you, Emma. Welcome.
Hello. Lovely to meet you all. It's been so fascinating hearing all this stuff today. I've long been interested in this area. I lived in Hebden Bridge for a few years, so I'm very aware of Incredible Edible already. And yeah, I posted in the chat, but just in case anyone didn't see it, I work for a tech studio called Geeks for Social Change. As our name implies, we care about social change, and we're very much rooted in both academia. A lot of us have studied in various areas relevant to our work, and also in activism. A lot of us have our roots in activism, and so we're kind of bringing those things together with tech to try and build things that help in a lot of different settings, but we are particularly interested in environmental work. And we've been working with the Wildlife Trusts over the last year on their Team Wilder project, and we've just recently started talking with Friends of the Earth about precisely what this whole session has been about today, and where there are gaps in the tech provision. How could we potentially step up and build a tool that would fill these gaps? And so it's been really great to hear from you all today in terms of what is already out there, like Land Explorer, like Urban Cultivate. And so what I'm going away from this meeting trying to process and would love to be in touch with some of you about potentially is what does not exist. And I'm potentially seeing some holes in terms of some of the more bureaucratic paperworky stuff that both communities and individuals have to tackle if they want to claim these spaces, and also the challenges that local authorities will face, overburdened local authorities will face in processing these requests. Maybe there's something we can build there. We basically have funding from Friends of the Earth to put together a pitch deck, a proposal that we will then take out for greater funding to actually try and build. So I'm coming in here with this for everyone who I've seen today is already working so firmly in this area and really knows what they're doing. We're like, we don't yet know what we're doing. We want to build the most useful thing. So thank you so much for everything I've heard today. It's just been fascinating. And if anyone has any thoughts, I'll pop my email in the chat. I would really love to hear from anyone about gaps, perceived gaps.
That's brilliant. And it feels like a conversation between, Lynn and Dan and Prue and yourself, and in the context of a place would be really fruitful, so you can get a sense that we can put all of the pieces together and see how they fit or don't. And there's also another piece of technology perhaps that is emerging from the Open Systems Lab, which is called Fairhold, and it's a kind of agreement, which is, you know, coming off the back of like the ideas of leasehold and freehold and so on. That Fairhold is, you can put in it a set of clauses that meets a specific range of kind of social and ecological and your local kind of goods, I suppose, and that they can be embedded in an agreement that you make. And I've been working with Ollie, who is developing the Fairhold tool. And we're going to have later on this year a kind of exploratory session on Fairholds for exactly this, for agreements between land owners and land users that aren't onerous, that take out a lot of that kind of fear-based type of stuff that tenancy agreements are about, managing risk and things, and it takes it way beyond that into something about, you know, with that shared purpose and shared care, with clauses that work for both parties and for the party that is nature and the land and people. So that's something that is also coming on board, but Ollie wasn't able to be here today. Anybody else have thoughts about Emma's work or invitation?
Another thing just to note is that we're a distributed studio, so we're dotted all over the UK. So most people who've spoken today are very rooted in place, which is really incredible. And at the moment we're working on something. It's very ambitious to ever think we'll just roll it out everywhere all at once. So we're very much trying to define what might be suitable place or places to kind of begin this. So it's been great to hear from specific communities today. I'm in London. Hello.
Brilliant.
Yeah, Emma, if you want to chat, I'd be very up for it. I'll share my email. But yeah, I feel like we're really focusing on interoperability between tools, because if there's one thing I'm tired of after like 12 years in community tech, it's how everyone keeps reinventing things and we keep trying and we keep not working together well. So finding ways to be interoperable between each other feels really exciting to me. And
this is a huge thing for us. We really want to work with what's already out there. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. So yeah, thank you. I would love to be in touch.
Thanks. Ed, you put in the chat something about appeal across the political spectrum. Would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the chat for people who've read it, but I just think that there's lots of things on the political spectrum that don't have broad ranging appeal, but what we're talking about here does, and it's worth bearing that in mind. I mean, perhaps there are political representatives out there who think edible community growing is a terrible idea, but I think they're in short supply. So I just think when we're pushing this, it's worth kind of having a somewhat optimistic angle on things. But I think as various people have touched upon, I think the issue is when we're kind of butting up against the machinery of government. So that was it really. So I think if people are, so I'm with Katie on the city council here in Leeds, and yeah, I just think that if for those who are approaching their local authorities, I just think having a default assumption that this will probably or potentially have appeal across the political spectrum is worth holding on to.
Brilliant, thank you. I just wondered whether maybe Niamh in Birmingham, perhaps any responses or thoughts that have come up for you, or maybe Patricia in Northern Ireland, Jenny or Phil, others who haven't said anything yet, if you have anything to share. Niamh.
Hi everybody. So for my part, I'm really interested in all the tools that you've been speaking about today. I think there's some absolutely amazing work going on with the mapping, and I'll be following up with that later, as mapping is something that we are interested in our areas at the moment. And we know this is something that's being done by all the councils, and as you say, capacity is an issue, but it's obviously a very important thing that we're trying to get on top of. So yeah, thank you for everything you've done, and it's been great to hear from you.
Thanks. It's great that you came along, Niamh. It's lovely to see you. Patricia.
Hi.
Hi.
So my video's on or off there. Anyway, yeah, it's a discussion we're always having about the mapping. I really liked the Lambeth project where, Dan, you probably know about it, was the app that the local community could use, and they walk around their community and map the land. And I think that's a really good starting place, because you can do a lot of mapping that may not ever be food growing spaces, but if you start with what the community identify, I was interested to hear, you know, maybe how others find that, or how the Lambeth ones thought that could be rolled out as well. We, I suppose, discussed mapping on and off, and have looked at different pots of money, but I'm just worried that then there's a big cost here, and how do we fund it, and identifying the funding. Sorry, Dan, do you want to?
No, I just wanted to follow up on just that point you made, Patricia, in terms of finding the spaces. We found it quite difficult, in fact, to find these underutilized sites, because often they're not designated on the map as an underutilized site or a vacant site. They're just in between buildings, or they're verges. They're not mapped sufficiently at this stage. So it's not as if we've got a map that we can use to filter out the spaces and identify them immediately. And that's where the app that was developed in Lambeth with Incredible Edible and Arup is really it's really quite exciting. It offers the local community to identify areas that aren't designated. We're Urban Cultivate is in quite active discussions with Lambeth, and we'd really like to work to create an Islington Lambeth bridge that we can exchange knowledge and ideas. So we're following up on that, but I think the app is a real idea, and it also brings the local community into the process as well. If you get them to inventorize the spaces with us, then I think that's one step to create that just dynamic that you need to have with the community that organizations like Octopus have built. So yeah, absolutely a really important point, I think.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to have a pilot in Northern Ireland?
I'd love to work in Northern Ireland. In fact, all of the towns and cities represented here on the call, and it's just, I think, a case now of having some additional chats and discussions and bringing the community together. And I'm really for this idea of not reinventing the wheel. So if we can create a consortium that brings everyone together to do this and make it replicable and scalable across lots of different urban spaces, then that's great. You know, I really wanted to foreground the fact that I think what we're all doing is very place-based, but also it can be used in other areas as well. And I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. And we're in Friends of the Earth office in Belfast here. So if you were thinking of spreading your work in this direction, we're based with Friends of the Earth. Yeah, I suppose we've just brought out a report on land in Northern Ireland and how communities can access it and what the barriers are. And we worked with local councils to do that. So I was interested in what Ed said about Leeds, because we did find local council officers were very keen to work with us and very positive about trying to look at simplifying the process. So I think you have got something that's cross-party and will be well received, something everybody can get behind.
Thanks, Patricia. So it just in our last minute, just want to say thank you so much to everybody being here and cross-fertilizing your work and ideas. And I know that I can see Jeremy's brain whirring about potential for things to piece together to go to funders about. And so I think what we'll do is to maybe I'll just send out an email to everybody. Is everyone happy to share their emails with each other, or is anyone not? Great, thank you. Thumbs up. And then we can sort of start to kind of unpick and share some of our, like, what we'd like to happen next and who we'd like to speak to next, and keep all the conversations rolling, because there's definitely huge potential to roll out these pilots. And I don't know, Prue, I think Prue and I are sort of planning on having conversation as well in a couple of weeks' time, specifically about Right to Grow pilots and what does that mean, and what does it mean in terms of an opportunity to sort of bring these tools together and integrate these tools in place and try them out. How do they work together? In what political contexts? And we need to sort of test develop the implementation of them together. So there's just a couple more things in the chat with the Right to Grow legislation from Ed, and obligations on local government. Timescales will be essential. E.g., if local government isn't obliged to respond to a demand for land within a given time frame, those requests might well end up in the long grass. Right, yeah, so I'll save this chat as well, and lots to think about, and let's pick up all the threads together as we go forward. So thank you. Sorry about the tech glitch, and sorry for all those people that had signed up but couldn't get in and then kind of lost their nerve and didn't wait for the passcode. So sorry to you that there wasn't a wider audience, but it's made for a really brilliant space for connection, I think, that maybe with a bigger group wouldn't necessarily have been possible. So thank you all so much, and we'll be in touch. Brilliant. Thanks a lot. Have a lovely day.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Maddie.
Pleasure. Thanks, Julie. Lovely to meet you.
Bye.
Thanks, Patricia. Lovely to see you. And Jenny, I'm not sure who Jenny is. You're muted, Jeremy.
Hi, Jenny. Are you still there?
Hi.
Hello.
Yes.
I see you've just recently caught up with us, or vice versa.
Yes.
Okay. If you want to learn specifically about community gardening in the UK, we can give you the email addresses of the right people. So if you want to just send your email or to me, we'll forward it on to the various people.
Yeah. I was just about to email you my address. So it's greenfuture.uk.org.
That's it.
And I'll send it through right now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And do feel free to join in future meetings if you hear about them. You know, we are UK, but we do get people dropping in from all over the world, depending on what we're talking about.
Yeah, I found it through Eventbrite, and I'm always watching free discussions of the things that I'm interested to learn in.
Okay. Well, as I said in the chat, I mean, I'm an amateur grower as well, but I was taught about the Three Sisters method by one of our colleagues in Cardiff, which is, you know, not Indigenous American either. It's Indigenous Welsh.
Yeah.
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 So I actually do that on my allotment, although I don't grow sweet corn because they get eaten by the badgers.
Yes, I tried to grow this last summer, and my corn, I never actually ended up eating any of the corn myself.
No.
The animals did.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Okay. Well, I'll email you
Yeah.
in a bit later. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks,
right.
Jenny.
Cheers.
Thank you for having me.
That's all right.
Pleasure.
Right. Well done,
You
you.
want to stop recording?
I'm going to do that now. Let's see.